Tamke tu je shaje resan zhang yin mata di je pongjang ba. Serje lombo dawe jibek shaje jarbe shala ke sanza jagar penchin pola kadrenche beman len chong kalan den chong me tata man simbe kanong orjin rumbo che la ke sanza shivzan kalan chinab jun korje depo tonder zalan la boy jarutin bakon la sande Kajurun boche la ke sanza cheme sa tuji jin korda manri shibzung boche tava tamjin chimba kumjin chi jej nyamin zhugon ren jin ke sanza shongomi chi chi jin je parana dusum sanje kunjen owan ransin jugan ozon Tava lame shabla ke sanza Daso simje tamje jala chusun rovar sinje la daso chu lamdan rovar sinje la Lan churva seva sinje la daso churva ishi san chawa sinje la daso
So last time we spoke about the and the Bardo of dreaming and of meditation. And so today we continue with the Bardo of dying. So the Bardo of dying is actually most critical. So pay good attention to it because it's really a critical time for us. So when you hear about a Bardo of dying, you learn what is going to happen when I die. How am I dying? And what kind of thoughts and what kind of feelings will I experience in the death process? So it's good to pay attention to that, and I'm sharing that to the best of my abilities. I'm by no means a great scholar, but I share really to the best of my knowledge, and therefore please listen carefully without being distracted. And you can also take some notes, because then you can come back later to those notes and then keep thinking about it, and if you can keep reflecting what is going to happen when I die, and what am I supposed to do when I die, what am I supposed to think when I die. So if you take those notes, that can help you. And so now again, as with the other bardos, the bardo of dying is this in-between state. It's a transitionary period, kind of a time span. For example, the bardo of meditation, we have said that this, or samadhi, that is starts from the time when you actually begin to meditate until you again rise from your meditation, however long that may be. It may be for an hour, it may be for any duration of a session, even just a minute or two. But the meditative state, the time you spend meditating, is called the bardo of meditation. And so now the bardo of dying is again a transitionary period, a period of time where something else arises. And so it begins when it's certain that you're going to die, so that the death process begins. So you're still alive, but your death is decided, and it lasts until you actually die. So that's the part of dying. So you're still alive, but you're dying. So some people die for different reasons. Some die from an illness, from a sickness. Some die very quickly. For example, a car accident, or they're shot by a weapon, or they fall down a cliff, or they drown in water. So when an accident happens very quickly, then there's not much time for the bardo of dying. But so generally speaking, this refers to the time when you get sick, and then your doctor tells you you're going to die, and maybe a doctor tells you how long you have to live, maybe a month, maybe a week, maybe a day. And then this time, once you find out that you're dying, until you die, and during this time, there's all kinds of feelings that you will process, that will come up in you. So different things arise in you. And that's the arising of the Bardo of dying. So. And so again, please refer to your root text and follow along, because the root text is really extremely important. And so there are 6 bardos and there are 6 root verses. And actually, it would be good if you could memorize those root verses. So again, please, everyone, have a look and follow along with on your root verses. So this is the verse on the Bardo of dying. Gima, now when the Bardo of dying is dawning upon me, I will abandon all grasping, yearning, and attachment, enter undistracted, a state in which the instructions are clear, and transfer my own awareness into the sphere of unborn space. As I am about to leave this compound body of flesh and blood, I will know it to be a transitory illusion. So, as we have said, the Bardo of dying begins when you realize that you're going to die, when it's certain that you're going to die. And so then, how do we die? So the way we die, it actually corresponds to the way we are born. So how are we born? How do we create this body? So first, the consciousness enters into the blood mix of your parents, and then in stages, the 4 elements, or the vital essences of the 4 elements, then form the physical body of flesh and blood. And then the same thing happens when you die in the reverse order. Then the elements dissolve into each other. First they arise, and then the elements dissolve. And once the elements have dissolved, then death occurs. So now we will speak about this. So the 4 elements of the body dissolve one into the other when we die. So the first element, there is the first element that dissolves is the earth element, and the earth element dissolves into the water element. So what happens? What feeling arises? What signs arise when that happens? And so it happens within a rather short period of time, maybe an hour or 2 or so. So it dissolves. When the earth dissolves into water, then you are no longer able to move your limbs. So normally you can just move around your limbs, but when the earth element dissolves, you can no longer move. That's the outer sign. And then there's an inner sign. And the inner sign of the earth element, having dissolved into water, is a feeling of being suppressed or crushed under a big mountain, or under some a big kind of avalanche of earth. So you kind of buried under a mountain. So then next, a water element dissolves into the fire element, and again there's an outer sign and an inner sign for that. The outer sign is that your bodily fluids are drying out, so the saliva in your mouth and the tears in your eyes and in your nose, the mucus, all of that dries. That's the outer sign. And the inner sign is, for example, it's like feeling of being, like when somebody throws you in the water, like when you're alive and naked, somebody throws you, like all of a sudden you're like thrown into this cold water. So there's this kind of feeling you get when that happens. So this is the inner sign that you will experience. And then next, fire element dissolves into the wind element. And so normally we have some body heat, and so when that dissolves, then the body heat, the heat of your body leaves you. That's the outer sign. And the inner sign is a sensation that is similar to being like in the midst of burnt, in the midst of fire. And then, and then the wind element then dissolves into consciousness. And the outer sign of that is that so normally when we are breathing, so we're breathing in, we're breathing out. But when the wind element has dissolved into the consciousness, then you do one last exhalation, but you can not inhale again. And that last exhalation is a very long exhalation. And that's the last one. Nothing can come back in. Maybe you have witnessed that if you have been with someone who is dying, they always let out this long exhalation, but then they do not again inhale. And then the breathing stops. And then the inner sign or the inner feeling that you experience then is just like being taken by a very strong wind. And so during that time, you experience a lot of difficulty. And so when there's so much suffering, but among all the suffering of death is the most intense. And there's all different kinds of pain or sickness we may have. And the pain of dying is said to be the most intense. It's called like the life force pain, life force pain. And that is intense suffering, because that is the time when the actual channels of the body stop functioning. So when they stop functioning, then that you experience that pain of the life force pain. And normally when you are sick, the channels are still functioning. So that's why the pain of sickness is not quite the same. And then when actually the elements have completely dissolved, the suffering is really incredible. So as mentioned, you experience all these sufferings of being carried by water, or drowning in water, or burned by fire, or buried under a mountain, and so on. These are all the pains, the sufferings of the life force, and it's said to be very intense. So then we go to the second line in that verse. I will abandon all grasping, yearning, and attachment. So that is critical. When you die, we will experience all sorts of fixations in our mind, all kinds of thoughts, attachment, holding on to, will all arise in the mind. So especially when, for example, a doctor tells you that you're going to die, so basically you find out that you're going to die, and before the elements dissolve, you find out that you're going to die. That is the time when you will have all these thoughts, these attachments come up. You will think that I'm going to die, and then whatever it is that you're attached to comes to mind. It could be your possessions, your money. It could be your family, somebody you love. To them, an extremely strong attachment usually arises. And if you hold on to this, if you cling on to this, you cannot become liberated. And because this is a cause for continuing to wander in samsara. And actually, it is said that this crossroads of death, this point of death, is extremely important, extremely a critical time. if you are able to sustain a virtuous mind of practice at the time of death, you can actually become liberated. But if you die in a negative state of mind, then you will take birth in the three lower realms, because that point of death, this crossroads, is so significant. So normally, we think about it like it's so easy. We think that, oh, when I'm dying, I'm going to have great faith in the three jewels, and I'm not going to be attached to anything. But really, it's not that easy when the time actually comes. And so, therefore, it's really important to practice that while you are still alive. Practice giving up the attachment to those possessions and whatever you are attached to, or whatever else there is in your mind. For example, if it's jealousy, then that will come up in your mind. Whatever it is, you have to focus on eliminating that now, because at the time of death, it will all come up. So whatever you are more habituated to, whatever is your kind of what's easy for you to arise, that all of that will arise at the time of death. So therefore, now is the time to train the mind, to practice. And so first you have to bring to mind impermanence, and you practice this now during the Bardo of living. If you practice well during the Bardo of living, then you will do okay in the Bardo of dying too, and then you can actually become liberated. If you do not practice well now in the Bardo of living, then you cannot become liberated at the Bardo of dying. So the Bardo of dying is a little bit like a test, like an exam, like a test. If you prepare well for your test, if you study well, then you have nothing to worry about. You will do good. You will pass the exam. But if you don't study so much, and if you just do the bare minimum, then it's not so sure whether or not you will pass the test. And if you don't study at all, then you basically can't even take the test. So it's quite similar to dying, actually. That's when your practice will be put to test. So normally somebody who has no practice, who has never really even heard about the Dharma, when the Bardo still appears to them, of course, but they will have no idea what's going on at that time. And then they very likely will take birth in the three lower realms. But then if you prepare yourself well, if you practice now and the Bardo then arises, it is possible that you will actually recognize something there. And if you prepare really well, then you may even become liberated. So the key point is to give up the attachment, the clinging to anything in this life. And you do that by bringing to mind impermanence. You think that I'm going to die like everybody else. Everyone is going to die. They're going to die. I'm going to die. And if you always have this in your mind, then you also will be much less afraid. And so when the time of death has come, and so you're sick, and you're sure you're going to die, we are normally very attached to all of our possessions in this life, especially our houses and like our money, our wealth, and so on. And so if this attachment is present at the time of death, you will not become liberated. And so, because you're going to worry and think about what is going to happen to all my wealth, and where will it go, and who will take it? So you will have all kinds of suspicions in your mind, and you might have nowadays people writing a testament, writing a will of where they want their money to go, their wealth to go. But even if you do that, actually, you don't know for sure if this is actually where it's going to go. And so the best thing you can do is to think, okay, how old am I? And realistically, how much do I have to live? And in the end, I know that I am going to die eventually. And so you bring it to mind, and then if you are wealthy, then it's actually good to give things away already when you are alive, and then you don't have to have much left over at the time of your death. So basically, you don't actually have to wait until you die, and you don't necessarily have to write even a will and keep everything until you die. You can slowly start giving things away before you die. Just do altruistic things. For example, some people like to give something to monasteries, or and they like to give it to the needy, to the poor people, and some people write that in their will too, and of course that's good, but you don't actually have to wait for your death in order to donate that to the poor people. Because the moment you give it away, you're already accumulating merit, and that merit can only be beneficial at the time of death. And so the most important thing is that you're not attached at the time of death. And if basically you slowly gave up everything, gave away everything, then there's nothing much left behind to be attached to. And then when there's nothing there to be attached to, then you will die with a much more kind of calm state of mind. It will be much easier. So otherwise, if you cling on, and often it happens in families when you write a will of what you will leave behind, then often there is a lot of argument over it, and people fight of who gets what, and it leads to all kinds of negative karma. And a lot of negative karma actually is accumulated surrounding those kind of inheritances, or like wills, things that people leave behind. And these are all causes for birth in the lower realms. And so when you die with that, you will just be in this loop of constant negativity. And so it's much better to make sure that nothing of that is present in your mind, and to prepare yourself for that, it is good to slowly kind of start letting go of things while you can. So coming back to the disillusion, so there are the four elements have dissolved, and so the last step that we just discussed was the wind element has dissolved into consciousness. So when that happens, the coarse thinking, the coarse thoughts stop, and then one goes into the more subtle levels of thinking. The more subtle levels of kind of mind are then three phases that one goes through, and they are called three appearances. So these three appearances are referred to as, so the first one is called appearance, the second one is called flaring, kind of rising or flaring, and the third one is called close attainment. And so these three appearances are related to three kind of appearances, of three perceptions. The perceptions of whiteness, of redness, and of blackness, which then occur one after the other. So first there's the whiteness. So first the sort of consciousness, there's only consciousness at this point. The four elements are gone, there's only consciousness. And then so the coarse levels are gone. Now you go into the subtle dissolution. So then the consciousness dissolves into what is called the appearance, so the first one. Consciousness dissolves into appearance. And when that happens, there is an experience of whiteness. And so this whiteness is just like a night sky, like a space that is filled with white light, like moonlight. And when that happens, when this moon-like experience of white pervading light arises, that is when the 32 concepts of hatred stop. And so you experience whiteness. The reason why you experience whiteness is because the concepts of hatred are connected to the white drop, the bindu that you have received from your father, and which is at your crown. And so the white drop is descending down, going down from the crown, and as it goes down towards the heart, you experience the whiteness of this white drop, because the drop is white, and it's related to hatred. So hatred dissolves. The 32 thoughts of hatred dissolves, and that's the experience of whiteness. And then the whiteness or the appearance dissolves into the closer the flaring or the redness. So the redness is the flaring, the rising because the red drop, the blood drop of your mother, which dwells in your navel, rises toward the heart. So the white drop descends, the red drop rises. And as it rises, the 40 thoughts of attachment come to an end. And that is experienced as a space filled with redness, a red light. So it's called redness. And then last is the blackness. So then the redness dissolves into the blackness, and when blackness arises, all the concepts of ignorance, the 7 concepts of ignorance, dissolve, they come to an end. And the experience of that then is a complete darkness, like a completely pitch black night sky. And so when we stop breathing, that there's an inner stopping and an outer stop of the breath. So when the 4 elements, after the 4 elements have dissolved, the outer breath stops. And then after that, after the subtle dissolution, then we completely fall into an unconscious state. And so you then normally fall into this unconscious state. So you lose all consciousness. And then after that, you again awake. You're waking from your regained consciousness. And that is then when you come to the fundamental basis of the mind, the ground, your ground consciousness, your awareness. So we call that, we say that this is when Mahamudra arises, or we say that this is when the Bardo Dharmakaya arises. And this point is actually the most critical, the most important of all, because it is this point that will decide whether or not you will become liberated. So we call that the Bardo of the Dharmakaya. Dharmakaya and the Bardo dawns, arises. What it basically means is that you come back to your natural state. You come to your true nature, and we call that Mahamudra, your empty nature. And so in the root text it says, enter undistracted, a state in which the instructions are clear. And so the instructions here refers to the meditation instructions, the guidance that you have received, the meditation that you have done. It really refers to enter the meditation that you have trained in. So you may call it Mahamudra or Dzogchen or middle way, Madhyamaka. what it means is that in which the instructions are clear means remember the nature of your mind, the essence of your mind, and recognize it. If you recognize it at that point, when you actually come to your ground consciousness, you will become liberated. And that is called the meeting of the mother and child luminosity, or and the mother luminosity or mother clear light is your ground dharmakaya, your fundamental nature. And the child luminosity is the luminosity, the meditation that you have practiced while you were alive. And at that point, when you dissolve into coming back to your fundamental nature, when you recognize your ground luminosity, then the practice that you have done in your lifetime then becomes one with that ground luminosity, this ground awareness. And so that's called the meeting of the mother and child luminosity. And then when they meet, meaning that they meeting means that you recognize your ground luminosity. Within that state, you become liberated. And then you will not have to go on to the other Bardos. And whether or not that will happen depends on what you do now in this lifetime. One thing is for sure, you will come to your fundamental nature. You will get there, but if you don't recognize it, then you will go on into the next Bardo. And then in the root verse, in the next line, it says, and transfer my own awareness into the sphere of unborn space. This own awareness or intrinsic awareness, that's the Dharmakaya. And you transfer it, you transfer your Dharmakaya, your true nature into space, meaning you merge with space. And so then, if I'm someone who, if I don't really know how to meditate, if you don't know how to meditate so well, then another thing you can do at that point is, if you have great devotion to your root guru, then you think of that root guru with your strongest devotion. And you can become liberated through the power of your devotion. Or if you have great devotion to your Yidam deity, then think of your Yidam deity intensely at that time, and you may become enlightened within the nature of that Yidam. So, in the dissolution, we are at the point now where the outer breath has stopped and the inner breath is just about to stop, but hasn't yet. So a person who has practice can become liberated at this point. And a person who does not have too much practice, this is the point now where the inner breath is about to stop but hasn't yet stopped. This is the point where we would apply POA, the POA practice. This is where the POA is applied. And so if you if that is applied and practiced properly, then it will become a little bit easier to become liberated. And so if one is a great practitioner, so for example, we hear sometimes from a higher lama, when they pass away, that they spend some time in Tukdam, which is like a meditative, kind of a post-mortal meditative state. And during this state of Tukdam, in this meditation, what arises within them is the true nature of the mind, and then they stay within that, and so that manifests to us as them continuing on in their meditation. So they continue sitting in meditation, and so that's one form. And then another one is to kind of guide others in Tukdam. So that is for someone who doesn't have that level of practice of just staying in meditation when they die. So then we can guide them or remind them. We can remind them and guide them in the practice. So, for example, when they have died, you can kind of speak into their ear and say, "Now you have died. Remember the instructions that you have received from the Guru, the instructions pointing out the nature of the mind, the teachings on Mahamudra. These are very important. So recognize your awareness. So you can guide them along by reminding them of the instructions that they have previously heard. And also we actually guide them during the Bardo stage. So there's these Bardo instructions where we guide them as each of the Bardos arises, and we speak to them and we tell them what is happening now and what's happening next. And at that time, actually, they don't actually hear a lot of real sound. But if you speak closely to their ear, and you tell them, then they can actually perceive that. So you say that now you have died, and now this is what's happening. The Bardo is appearing, and the first Bardo arises, and then the next arises, and now you come to the fundamental nature of the mind, the ground of the mind. You will recognize Mahamudra. If you have practiced Mahamudra before, remember it now, and so on. So it's very important to guide them and remind them at that time. So, of course, a lama or anybody who has great practice, very advanced practice and realization, they don't require that kind of guidance. But anyone who is not so stable in their practice, it's very helpful to remind them and to guide them. And so when somebody has died, it is better, and the family is kind of calm next to them, and it's not like weeping and so on, but it's kind of calm next to them, and just let the deceased person be. And ideally, if there are Dharma friends with whom they've had a pure samaya, then they can be there to remind them of the Guru's instructions. And one thing I think is a very good thing to do is to read prayers like the Samantabhadra prayer or the Ganges Mahamudra prayer or Rangtung Dorje's Mahamudra aspiration prayer. And when you read those, read it very clearly, not like fast, but very clearly so they can clearly hear. And so if you don't have any of the other texts that you can guide them with, you just remind them of the natural state, because this is what all these prayers really speak about, is the natural state of the mind. So therefore I think it's really good to read that to them, to guide them. And so that is now, again, if you don't have any other Bardo kind of guidance instructions, then you can just remind them of these things. So then in the root verse, then next it says, so as I transfer my own awareness into this sphere of unborn space, as I'm about to leave this compound body of flesh and blood. So now then I will know it to be a transitory illusion. So this is where you move on then. So again, to recap, so you bring to mind impermanence and you enter into whichever practice you normally do at that time. And so this completes the Bardo of dying. And so the Bardo of dying, it goes until you reach this Dharmakaya Bardo, where you come to the Dharmakaya, your true nature. And if you recognize it, you will become liberated. And if you do not recognize it, then you will go on to the next Bardo. And so this time of this opportunity of recognition does not actually last very long at all. It's just about a second, a moment or two. And in one moment, if you don't recognize it in this second, then the next moment you go on to the next Bardo, and that is the Bardo of Dharmata. So if you're not liberated in the Dharmakaya Bardo, then you go on to the Bardo of Dharmata. So there's two kinds of individuals who do not go on to the Bardo of Dharmata after the Dharmakaya Bardo. So one is a great practitioner who becomes liberated in the Dharmakaya Bardo. They don't go on into the Bardo of Dharmata because they're already liberated. And the second kind that doesn't go to the Bardo of Dharmata is a very evil person. If the evil is very strong, then they will skip the Bardo of Dharmata and go directly into the three lower realms. And so then it's just those two, but except for those, the Bardo of Dharmata, then the second one, appears to anyone, everyone, whether they're Buddhist or not, whether they're human or not, humans, animals. The Bardo of Dharmata appears to everyone. So please all follow the root verses in the Bardo of Dharmata. There's really a key point in there. It says, Gema, now when the Bardo of Dharmata is dawning upon me, I will abandon all fear and terror, recognizing whatever appears as the natural display of awareness. I will know it to be the way this Bardo unfolds. Now that I have reached this momentous, crucial point, I will not fear these natural manifestations, the peaceful and wrathful deities. So if you have not become liberated in the Bardo of dying, and then you go on to the, so you come to the Bardo of Dharmakaya and you don't recognize it, so then you're not liberated in the Bardo of dying. Then instantly another concept, a thought arises in the mind. And so that is then when the Bardo of Dharmata will appear. So if you have not recognized the luminosity of the Bardo of dying, and you go on to the Bardo of Dharmata, and here the peaceful and the wrathful deities will arise. So there are those 100 peaceful and wrathful deities, and so they arise in that Bardo of Dharmata, but we normally don't recognize them because the mind is confused. We actually think that there is something that's going to harm me there. And it is just like we can see how afraid we will be of those deities when we think about how afraid we are of evil spirits and these demons. People always say that there's this demon, I've seen this demon, they're so scared, or they walk along a road and they think there's this evil spirit there. And how afraid are we of these evil spirits? And so this is, we call them evil and demons and so on, evil spirits. And so this is exactly how we will see then those Bardo, peaceful and wrathful deities. We will see them like those demonic beings and not at all recognize them as the deity. In fact, we will think that they are out to get us and out to harm us. And that's also because they are to get accompanied by extremely loud sounds, like thunderous sounds and very bright light and rays. It is said that the thunderous sound, the sounds are louder than 1,000 thunders. So if you think about a really strong thunder, if it's like just 1, 2, or 3 in strength, how scary does that sound to us already? Now imagine that's by times 1,000. How would you feel if you're in the midst of these like roaring sounds of thunder all around you? There's in tremendous fear when you find yourselves in the midst of that, and it's hard to recognize. So in the root verse, now turn to your root verse, it says, I will abandon all fear and terror. Memorize these words. This is in the root verse here. This is the thing to remember, and you should memorize it. I will abandon all fear and terror. If you keep reminding yourself of that now, if you keep reminding yourself, oh, these are going to be the peaceful and the wrathful deities. If you keep reminding yourself, then when they actually appear, you might remember that and then recognize, oh, there's nothing to be afraid about. But for that, you have to memorize that now. You have to remind yourself. So then, the deities begin to arise. First, the peaceful deities appear. And so that begins with the 5 Dhyani Buddhas, the 5 Buddha families. They appear one after the other. And so they appear as the radiance of the 5 kinds of primordial wisdom. So they are like the energy, the dynamic energy of the 5 wisdoms, appearing as those 5 deities. And this light, the light that they appear in, is extremely bright. It is dazzling and blinding light. It is the light of primordial wisdom. And generally, we feel afraid of this light. It's too bright and too blinding. We try to get away from it. It's too intense. Actually, those deities are here to take us and to protect us, but we don't recognize that. We try to avoid it because it's too intense. We're overwhelmed by the intensity of it. And so we try to get away. And so then together with that light, there appears a second light. So each deity has its own color. And when this one deity in its color rises, then next to it there's another light in the same color, but much more gentle, a very dim, soft, gentle light. And that feels much better to you. And it's generally our tendency where we think of, oh, this is the easier thing to do. This is the easier way to go. I'm going to do that. So that's the habit the pattern that you will follow. So you will go there. You will try to avoid the brilliant, dazzling, and blinding light, and you will go to the gentle, soft, nice light. That's actually a mistake, because that will cause you to wander in samsara. So these 5 Buddha families can come one after the other to escort you. And then if you don't recognize them, then all the other peaceful deities will appear. So there's 42 peaceful deities that will appear. And then if you don't recognize them, then they turn wrathful. And then all the wrathful, then there's 58 wrathful deities that will appear. And they still come to take you. So you haven't recognized the peaceful ones, so they become infuriated and wrathful, and still want to protect you, but you are so afraid of them, and you have a tendency to escape, wanting to escape. So therefore, it's really good to familiarize yourself with those deities when you're alive. It's very good actually to look at the tanka. That's extremely helpful to look at these images. And you all have received the Shitro and the peaceful, wrathful Buddha empowerment. So you can see on those images, on those tankas, they appear in all kinds of scary forms. They have these wild animal heads, like a leopard or a tiger or like a wolf and so on. And so they have all these really frightening ways of appearing. And so because you're not familiar with them, you are afraid. And so then you go the other way. But if you familiarize yourself with them, then there's nothing to be afraid about. It's just because if you don't recognize them. But if you recognize them, the moment you recognize them, you become liberated. And so then, therefore, if you train your mind now and in recognizing that these are not out to harm me and there's nothing to be afraid, as sort of peaceful and wrathful deities, then it will become much easier at that time.
Tumba Lame Sanje Rinpoche Chopa Lame Tamje Rinpoche Rimba Lame Gindu Rinpoche Jamne Kunjo Sum Lain Chu Bambu